While the world was distracted by headlines, protests, and breaking conflicts, China quietly made a strategic move near the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important energy choke points on Earth. No dramatic announcement, no global panic. But behind the silence lies a shift that could reshape trade routes, energy security, and the balance of global influence for years to come. The real question is not why it happened, but why almost nobody noticed. The most important geopolitical shifts in history are often invisible while they are happening. People tend to notice loud events, wars, elections, explosions, public confrontations, dramatic speeches, because human attention naturally focuses on visible conflict. But the real architecture of global power is usually built quietly, slowly, and strategically over time. Influence rarely arrives overnight. It accumulates through positioning, infrastructure, economic leverage, technological expansion, and control over systems that the modern world depends upon every single day. That is why strategic moves near critical locations like the Strait of Hormuz matter far more than many people realize. Most individuals hear about geopolitical events only when headlines become dramatic. But global influence is not shaped only by dramatic moments. It is shaped by the systems operating underneath those moments. Trade routes, shipping corridors, energy supply chains, financial agreements, digital infrastructure, industrial production, and strategic partnerships all form the invisible framework of global power. Whoever gains influence over these systems gains leverage extending far beyond military force alone. And this is where quiet strategy becomes powerful. Modern geopolitics increasingly revolves around interdependence. Nations are no longer competing only through armies and weapons. They compete through logistics, technology, economics, energy security, manufacturing capacity, rare resources, transportation networks, and long-term partnerships. The modern world functions like a connected system, and nations capable of influencing key parts of that system gain enormous strategic advantage. The Strait of Hormuz represents one of those key points. A large percentage of the world's oil passes through this narrow waterway. Any disruption there affects energy prices, shipping markets, financial systems, industrial economies, and political stability across multiple continents. This means that influence near Hormuz is not simply regional influence. It carries global implications. But the fascinating part is how modern powers often expand influence quietly. Instead of direct confrontation, they build economic ties. Instead of dramatic announcements, they secure long-term agreements. Instead of visible occupation, they establish logistical access. Instead of immediate conflict, they invest in future dependency. This is strategic patience. And strategic patience is one of the most underestimated forms of power in the modern world. Most societies today operate inside short attention cycles. News changes every hour. Social media amplifies emotional reactions instantly. Public attention moves rapidly from one crisis to another. In this environment, long-term strategic thinking becomes increasingly rare. But nations that think decades ahead, while others remain distracted by immediate events, often position themselves for enormous future influence. This is why unnoticed moves can eventually become the most important ones. History repeatedly demonstrates this pattern. By the time the public recognizes a geopolitical shift, the foundation for that shift has often been developing quietly for years. Infrastructure projects, trade agreements, energy partnerships, port access, investment corridors, and diplomatic networks slowly create influence beneath the surface, until eventually the balance of power begins visibly changing. The process appears gradual at first, then suddenly it appears obvious. But the sudden transformation was usually built quietly over a long period of time. This principle extends beyond geopolitics into every area of life. Most people misunderstand how meaningful transformation happens. They focus on visible outcomes instead of invisible preparation. They admire success without noticing the years of discipline behind it. They see powerful nations, successful companies, or influential leaders without understanding the patient systems building that created that position. Real power often grows silently before it becomes visible. That is why strategic awareness matters so much in the modern age. Intelligent observers do not only watch dramatic headlines. They pay attention to systems. They ask deeper questions. Who controls supply chains? Who influences critical resources? Who is building infrastructure? Who is increasing dependency? Who is preparing for long-term influence rather than short-term attention? These questions matter because the future is often shaped quietly before the public fully notices what is happening. Another important lesson is that modern power is increasingly tied to connectivity rather than isolation. Nations capable of integrating themselves into trade networks, energy systems, technology ecosystems, and logistical infrastructure create influence that extends far beyond military presence. Economic relationships can become strategic leverage. Infrastructure can become geopolitical influence. Technology standards can become forms of long-term control. And many of these developments appear technical or uninteresting to the average observer. But beneath those technical details lies the future architecture of global influence. That is why control of critical systems matters so deeply. Energy routes, maritime corridors, communication infrastructure, semiconductor production, rare minerals, artificial intelligence, and transportation networks are becoming the real battlegrounds of modern competition. Military strength still matters, but systems increasingly matter more. A nation that controls essential systems gains influence without necessarily firing a single shot. This also explains why some geopolitical moves appear calm externally while carrying enormous long-term implications internally. Public attention often mistakes silence for weakness or inactivity. But strategic actors frequently prefer quiet expansion because quiet expansion creates less resistance. Influence grows more effectively when it avoids unnecessary confrontation too early. This is not new historically. Many empires throughout history expanded influence first through trade, infrastructure, and economic integration before military dominance became fully visible. Economic dependency often precedes political influence. Strategic access often precedes strategic control. And in a deeply interconnected global economy, these patterns become even more important. The challenge for modern societies is that most populations are not trained to think systemically. People focus naturally on immediate events because immediate events feel emotionally urgent. But the future is often determined less by emotional moments and more by structural developments unfolding gradually beneath public attention. That is why disciplined observation becomes a critical skill. You must learn to look beneath headlines, beneath outrage, beneath short-term distractions, because the loudest event is not always the most important event. Sometimes the truly transformative shift is happening quietly in trade agreements, shipping access, infrastructure investment, energy strategy, or technological integration, while public attention remains focused elsewhere. And perhaps the deeper lesson is this: the world is entering an era where strategic intelligence matters more than ever. Global competition is becoming increasingly complex, interconnected, and system-driven. Nations that understand long-term positioning will shape the future more effectively than nations reacting emotionally to every immediate crisis. The same principle applies personally. People who think long-term often outperform people trapped inside short-term reactions. Quiet preparation eventually creates visible advantage. Disciplined positioning eventually creates opportunity. Consistent systems eventually produce powerful outcomes. Because lasting influence, whether in geopolitics, leadership, economics, or personal life, is rarely created through noise alone. It is built patiently, strategically, and often invisibly long before the rest of the world finally notices the landscape has already changed. Modern power is no longer defined only by armies, weapons, or dramatic public confrontations. The 21st century is increasingly shaped by something quieter and far more complex: strategic patience. The nations gaining the greatest influence today are often not the ones making the loudest statements, but the ones carefully building long-term systems of leverage while the rest of the world remains distracted by short-term events. This is one of the biggest changes in modern geopolitics. In the past, empires expanded visibly. Armies crossed borders, territory was seized openly, conflict was obvious. But today, influence often spreads through infrastructure, trade, technology, shipping access, financial dependency, energy partnerships, and industrial integration. The battlefield has become economic, logistical, and technological as much as military. And many people fail to notice these shifts because they do not look dramatic at first. A port agreement appears technical. An energy investment sounds economic. A shipping partnership feels administrative. A trade corridor seems commercial. But over time, these quiet arrangements begin creating influence networks that reshape the global balance of power. That is why strategic patience has become such a powerful weapon. Most societies today operate inside extremely short attention spans. News cycles move hourly. Social media rewards emotional reactions instead of long-term thinking. Governments often focus on immediate political survival rather than decades ahead. Public attention jumps constantly from one crisis to another. But nations that think long-term gain enormous advantages over nations trapped in short-term reactions. Strategic patience means understanding that influence grows gradually before it becomes obvious. It means building systems quietly while others focus only on visible headlines. It means preparing for future leverage years before the rest of the world realizes why those preparations matter. This approach requires discipline because modern culture rewards visibility. People assume power must always look dramatic. But some of the most transformative geopolitical moves happen almost invisibly at first. History repeatedly proves this. Major global shifts rarely appear sudden to those paying close attention. The signs usually emerge years earlier through economic integration, infrastructure projects, supply chain development, maritime access, technological expansion, and strategic partnerships. But because these developments seem slow and technical, most people ignore them until their consequences become impossible to overlook. By then, the foundation has already been built. That is the true nature of long-term strategy. The Strait of Hormuz becomes important in this context because it represents one of the world's critical systems. Modern civilization depends heavily on energy flows, shipping lanes, and stable transportation networks. Whoever gains influence near these strategic systems gains leverage extending far beyond regional politics. And leverage is the real currency of modern geopolitics. Nations no longer need direct control over entire territories to shape global outcomes. Sometimes, controlling access, influence, infrastructure, or dependency becomes more effective than direct domination. A country connected deeply to trade systems, energy routes, manufacturing networks, and financial structures gains influence without needing constant confrontation. This is why unnoticed geopolitical moves matter so much. The average person often sees geopolitics emotionally through conflict and headlines. But strategic thinkers analyze systems. They ask deeper questions. Who controls logistics? Who influences trade routes? Who dominates industrial production? Who secures access to critical resources? Who is quietly building dependency? These questions matter because the future is increasingly shaped through interconnected systems rather than isolated events. And perhaps the most important lesson is that preparation matters more than reaction. Nations that prepare strategically before crises emerge often gain enormous advantages afterward. Those reacting emotionally and impulsively usually fall behind. This principle applies far beyond geopolitics. Individuals also succeed through strategic patience. Most meaningful achievement happens quietly before it becomes visible publicly. Discipline repeated daily rarely looks dramatic. Preparation often feels invisible. Consistent long-term thinking may appear slow compared to quick emotional decisions. But over time, patient systems outperform impulsive reactions. The same is true globally. A nation investing steadily in infrastructure, logistics, energy partnerships, technology, and maritime access may appear less dramatic than one making aggressive speeches. But years later, the quieter strategy may produce far greater influence. This requires a completely different way of understanding power. Power is not always loud. Power is not always immediate. Power is often structural. Structural power means shaping the systems other nations depend upon. The modern world runs on interconnected networks, shipping lanes, digital infrastructure, energy supplies, manufacturing chains, financial systems, and communication technology. Nations capable of influencing these systems gain leverage that extends far beyond military presence alone. And because these systems are interconnected globally, even small strategic moves can create enormous long-term consequences. This is why awareness becomes such an important skill in the modern age. Most people react only after change becomes obvious. Strategic observers recognize patterns much earlier. They pay attention to quiet developments before they become global realities. Because by the time the majority notices a shift, the shift has often already happened. The future rarely arrives all at once. It emerges gradually through patterns that accumulate over time. Infrastructure leads to influence. Influence leads to dependency. Dependency leads to leverage. And leverage reshapes power. That process is rarely dramatic in the beginning, but history shows that quiet movements beneath the surface often become the forces that redefine entire eras. And the societies, leaders, and individuals who understand this principle early are usually the ones best prepared for the world that eventually emerges. And that is the real lesson the world keeps missing. Power does not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes the future changes quietly, one strategic move at a time, while everyone else is distracted by the headlines. By the time the world finally notices, the balance has already shifted.